So eventually I came to the understanding that the best thing I could do for my hurting child was to enter into her painful reality.
That's tough.
Yeah. And even though I felt unprepared, I felt pretty emotionally fragile myself. I needed to do that. It wasn't easy, but every time I made the choice to do that, it was certainly worth it because it definitely made a difference in this difficult reality.
Welcome to the Blended Family Coaching Show, where you'll discover how to move your stepfamily from just surviving to truly thriving.
Grab your headphones and listen in as we share practical, real-life strategies for building healthy bonds,
Understanding the kids' perspective,
romance and partnership,
parenting with great teamwork.
and yes, even co-parenting with a difficult ex.
We're Mike and Kim Anderson, and we believe with the right tools, every step couple can overcome the common challenges of stepfamily life.
Join us for authentic and sometimes comical conversations to discover how you can lead your family with confidence and create the future you really want.
Well, welcome to episode 7 on the Blended Family Coaching Show. We're super excited to jump into this one.
Glad you're here.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this episode is part 1 of a 2-part series where we're going to be focused on responding and helping our kids to cope when you're dealing with the influence of a toxic ex.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's just too common in the people that we get to communicate with and serve. That toxic ex isn't always just, the parent. Sometimes it's a toxic step parent in your kid's other home. And we hope that these next 2 episodes are going to bring value in that situation as well. Now, in our last episode, we discussed how our kids can get stuck in what we call a parental allegiance. That's really between mom and dad. Who do I choose, mom or dad? And we touched on the possibility of having a toxic ex who seems to be making that harder for the kids than it really needs to be. And they're actually feeding into that dynamic and, just the way that they talk to or behave around the kids. Yeah. So if you missed episode 6, you might want to go back and check that out because that might set you up for a little deeper understanding of this episode and next week as well.
Yeah. And, we need to understand the reality, and that is that we really can't control that other home.
What?
We really have no power over how our ex chooses to behave. We can't fix that. But we can impact all of these difficult situations for our kids simply by what we choose to do in our home. The strategies that we use around this whole topic of the toxic ex, they can make a huge difference for our kids when we're able to get it right. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we get this right? How do we do it right? Now, we talked in the last episode about the right way to respond when the ex is bad-mouthing your home. Right? We don't stoop to their level. We choose to refrain from bad-mouthing, even though it's happening in the other home. Yeah, we're not going to compete with that other home or put the kids in the middle. But in this episode, we're going to talk about what we can do in our home when that unstable or toxic ex is causing some really tough things for our kids, causing harm. When you're dealing with some kids that are really hurting, maybe they're angry or confused by what they're experiencing over there in that other home. And you're looking for ways to cope and help your kids, which good for you. We're so glad you're here because that's what we're going to explore today. We know how frustrating this can be. It's really common, all too common, unfortunately. And we really want to equip you. We want to help you out here. In fact, our inspiration for this episode came from one of you who asked us this question. How do I help a stepchild with a toxic biological mom who won't follow court orders? Wow. I mean, we don't know all the details behind this question. There could be a lot of things going on, but we get a strong sense that this stepchild is really hurting. Probably some strong emotions that this child is experiencing, maybe some disappointment, anger, maybe even some issues around abandonment. We're not quite sure. It could be that this child is being impacted by a toxic parent, the biological mom in this case, who might be bad-mouthing the other home or even turning the child against that other home. The child might really be stuck in that parental allegiance that we talked about last week, possibly even showing resistance towards the other home, the other parent. That can happen too. There's a lot of possibilities. We've personally experienced this in our home, and we've helped many other couples to manage these situations, these really tough, heartbreaking situations like this stepmom seems to be in. She wants to manage this situation. Well, good for her. We're excited to help her.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, actually, for asking that question. Now, we said this was going to be a 2-part series. So this week, we're going to focus more on the child who's feeling hurt. Like Kim said, maybe sad or confused, disappointed, whatever it might be. But they're being impacted by that toxic ex, and it's creating some hurt, sadness, confusion.
Some pain.
Yeah. They're not necessarily acting out, but they might be withdrawn. Maybe they're quiet. Maybe you notice they're kind of sullen. Now, next week in part 2, we're going to focus on a different child. We're going to focus on that defiant child who's maybe feeling hurt by that toxic ex, but their response is more outward. They could be acting out in lots of different ways, right? Maybe disrespect or rebellion or anger. Maybe they're blaming you or somebody else. They might even be trying to reject your home in the process. That can be really painful for us. And they might be acting out in other places, like school or other social settings or somewhere like that. So that's going to be the child we're going to focus on next week, that defiant or rebellious child. But today we're focused on that child that's just hurting. They're sad and they're confused and they're not sure what to do.
There's some difficult emotions going on. But before we can help our kids, we really need to take some time and prepare ourselves. How are we going to respond to our child or our stepchild when they're experiencing these difficult emotions? So, I mean, I remember with my daughter, Annika, when she was really struggling with a lot of painful emotions and a lot of confusion, I felt uneasy. I really didn't feel very secure in my ability to help. And a lot of times when she would start having some difficulties, I would start to feel fearful. Honestly, I had an emotional battle of my own going on at that point. I was concerned for her. I was worried. I didn't know how to connect with her in that moment. And I was also dealing with a lot of my own guilt. I would blame myself for what she was experiencing. Well, it was tough. So I started to feel really overwhelmed. I also was overwhelmed with anger towards my ex, right? Oh gosh. I was really tempted to badmouth him and kind of set my daughter straight and tell her how things were with him. But I knew that that would only add to her confusion and burden her with an even deeper parental allegiance. And I didn't want to do that to her. Now, of course, most of us have a natural instinct to protect our kids. And I certainly had that with Annika. I wanted to protect her from pain. So sometimes I try to distract her, right? We don't like to see our kids in pain. So it's the old, oh man, my kid is down. Hey, let's go get some ice cream. That'll make you feel better.
Let's do something fun.
So kind of distraction mode. Or even sometimes I try to paint this silver lining around her situation, kind of like, oh, but the bright side is, well, at least you got this, that kind of thing, and gloss over her actual emotions. But I also knew that that really didn't help her to move through the emotions. The emotions were still beneath the surface. And it's really not healthy to overlook emotions. That's not something we want to be teaching our kids, to ignore their emotions. And it's not healthy for us either. So eventually I came to the understanding that the best thing I could do for my hurting child was to enter into her painful reality.
That's tough.
Yeah. And even though I felt unprepared, I felt pretty emotionally fragile myself. I needed to do that. It wasn't easy, but every time I made the choice to do that, it was certainly worth it because it definitely made a difference in this difficult reality.
Yeah, I think everybody needs to hear that too. You're probably going to feel inadequate in this whole area. Like, oh, gee, I'm not a child psychologist or a counselor or whatnot. It's okay that you feel inadequate. We're gonna walk you through some ways to help you feel confident.
We're gonna bolster your courage today.
Absolutely. Yep.
Now, for me, I actually had to to do some things, to step up my game a little bit. I had to do some things. Yeah. So I came to this conclusion that I really wanted to be there for my daughter and support her emotionally and do that well. But first I had to get some help around my own emotions, right? Because I couldn't expect her to deal with her emotions if I wasn't doing the same. It just wasn't going to work. So I had to kind of conquer the fear and the guilt that gripped me. And that took some work.
Sure.
For me, I actually worked with a counselor on that and worked through a lot of my stuff. And that was really helpful. And then next I gained some skill around what Dr. John Gottman calls emotion coaching. And we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. But what I really needed to do was put some new tools in my parenting toolbox. So I engaged in a learning process. It took a while, but it really gave me some confidence in my abilities to support my daughter emotionally. And I needed those tools. And then I had to practice what I learned, right? Because knowledge really is of no value unless you put it into practice. I didn't expect myself to be perfect. I knew that wasn't going to happen, but I just continued to make efforts. I used those tools that were in my toolbox and I kept at it. Even when things didn't go well, a lot of times it kind of fell apart on me, but I didn't give up. And over time, my communication skills with my daughter really started to improve. I gained that confidence that I needed, and I was able to help her navigate through some of those troubling emotions. And now she's 24 years old and I'm still able to do that, but it did take some intentional effort and some work, right? I had to deal with my own emotions first on my own so that I could focus on Annika's emotions and not be overcome with my own stuff.
We're so excited to let you know about something brand new we've created just for you.
We've realized that with so many episodes available here on the show, it might feel a bit overwhelming to find the topics that matter most to you. That's why we've created a simple tool for you to receive a personalized playlist focused on your current struggle or your biggest challenge.
That's right. It's called the Blended Family Breakthrough Quiz. You'll answer just a few questions, and based on your responses, we'll email you a curated custom playlist of episodes that are specific to you.
This simple quiz will direct you to the most impactful episodes that pertain to you personally and keep you on track in your journey of discovery, learning, and growth. So, scroll all the way to the bottom of the show notes for this episode and click the link to take the Blended Family Breakthrough Quiz today.
Okay, let's get back to the discussion. Yeah, that's right. So that sets you up to be just in the right frame of mind for all this. Now, let's focus on some strategies and communication skills to help the kids cope with their difficult emotions. So you're getting yourself in the right frame of mind, but now we've got to focus on these communication skills to help them. So let's talk about how we can emotionally coach our kids and support them as they are walking through those tough, highly charged feelings. This is challenging. First, we've got to ask, okay, Kim used this term emotion coaching. Well, what exactly is emotion coaching? Well, it's a term that comes from Dr. John Gottman, who has an amazing parenting book called Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child.
My favorite parenting book.
It's a great book. Now, we're going to link to that in the show notes so you can go find that. But you might want to grab a copy of it after you listen to this podcast. Now, parents who use the tool of emotion coaching really serve as their child's guide through the world of emotion. Man, if you're a guy and you're listening to this, and you're like, great, we got to talk about our feelings.
We go.
Yeah, we got to talk about our feelings, and our kids need to talk about our feelings, because if we can't draw that up and out of them, then they're going to stuff it and bottle it, and it's going to come out in ways you don't want it to. Yeah. So, guys, brave up, and we're going to go talk about our feelings. You can do this. Yeah, that's right, right? Because we've got to be parents that are going to go beyond just accepting our kids' emotions. We've got to help them learn to set limits and have appropriate behavior and really teach our kids how to regulate their feelings so that they go into, appropriate outlets and learn how to solve problems. Kids need to learn that. So the goal is we're going to coach our kids toward mastering their own emotions in a really healthy and productive way. Yeah. And we can't do that unless we're willing to tackle all this. Now, this all sounds great. But those of us living in a blended family can run into some very unique challenges when the kids' emotions are tied to a toxic ex, that maybe that parent in the other home who just keeps feeding these difficult emotions. And we can't change that ex, but what we can do is show up really well for our kids in our home. So we've got to emotionally support them while being really careful not to feed into those parental allegiances we talked about by bad mouthing or saying the things we kind of want to say, but we've got to control our own tongue. So that can be really challenging. So let's talk about how we can manage all that through the lens of emotion coaching.
Yeah. So there's 5 steps to emotion coaching that Gottman teaches in his book. So we're going to just explore each of those 5 steps in light of how to best respond when we're dealing with a toxic influence that we really can't control. So let's dive in. Step 1 is all about awareness and listening. And some of you have probably already mastered this step, but you really want to listen. Learn to listen with empathy. That's your starting point. When you hear your kids grumbling or complaining or expressing something, that's the moment. Yeah.
Pay attention.
So this awareness, you're building that awareness around what's really going on with your child. And empathetic listeners, they don't just use their ears, right? We want to watch for physical evidence of these emotions. Maybe they're having chronic upset tummies, or maybe their posture is really slouched over or
defeated.
Or you're seeing signs of stress in your child. These parents use their imaginations to kind of put themselves in their children's shoes. They try to understand the child's perspective as much as they can in that moment. Now, Gottman says that empathy is the foundation of emotion coaching. So step 1 of emotion coaching is simply being aware of and empathizing with your child's emotions, trying to understand it. Now, kids, they often express their emotions kind of indirectly, in ways we don't really get. We get scratching our heads. What's going on with this kid? But if we can watch and listen carefully, sometimes we can really start to decode these messages that tend to be hidden with our kids and how they interact. Now, most of the time, kids do have some really valid reasons for these emotions, but it can be hard for them to articulate. Their communication skills aren't up there yet. They're not quite sure. And so that's what we're going to help them do. Now, to empathize with our kids, we need to step back. And what we really want to do is take a look at that big picture. What's really going on in their lives? That's really important. So an example might be when you see a child withdrawing or acting really sullen or kind of standoffish. When they're transitioning back to your house from that other home, take note of that. What might they be feeling in that moment?
Yeah, watch for patterns in that as well.
So step 1 is really about awareness and trying to get into your kids' shoes.
Absolutely. Now, step 2 is really examining your mindset about, your child struggling with these tough emotions. Sometimes we want to avoid these conversations because they're painful.
I sure did.
Yeah, we don't want to see our kids in pain, so we try to shorten that as best we can. Other times, like we said earlier, we feel really inadequate. But what we really want to do is recognize this as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to build intimacy with the child. It's an opportunity to coach them and how they process and self-regulate. So as much as we want to buck against this, we actually want to go, here's my opportunity to step in and really enter into this with them to help them. And, our attempts to avoid a child's negative feelings, it might be tied to kind of that. Sometimes we just have this hope that their feelings will go away. They're kids, right? They're adaptable. They'll get over it.
I kind of want them to bury it.
But most of the time, emotions don't work that way.
No.
In reality, negative feelings dissipate only when kids can talk through it and when they feel really understood.
Yeah, that's key.
So we have to have a right mindset on there. And here's the thing. When we recognize the opportunity, when we have that opportunity to step in when the kids are struggling, we're actually helping them feel emotionally connected to us, right? Our bond gets to build, our trust builds with them, and we can help them process their emotions. And that's when really good things happen in relationships. It can be a
positive thing.
Yeah. Gottman says that when we do all this well, kids are going to have fewer behavioral problems. they're going to better able to recover from distressing experiences, and we're going to be more connected to them.
Yeah.
And through this process, kids develop this, what's called an emotional intelligence that's going to prepare them to handle the challenging emotions that they're going to face all the way throughout life. So you're setting them up. You're taking this opportunity to set them up for success in their future.
Yeah. So instead
That's
of running
step 2.
away from the negative feelings, we're going to step into them.
Step right into them. So
Yep.
Step 1 is being aware and listening. Step 2 is getting our mindset right about how we're going to move forward. Then what do we have to do?
Opportunity. And then step 3 is validating our kids, right? So we're aware, we're listening, we're recognizing this opportunity. Now we're using what we hear and what we observe to validate the child in that moment.
Yeah.
And the goal here is really to use soothing words that reflect back what you're hearing or what you're seeing so that you can kind of connect on this heart-to-heart level with the child. You're creating a safe space for them. Engaging kids in this open dialogue, it's much more effective than applying any of your adult logic.
I can apply logic really quick.
Yeah. Or jumping into fix-it mode. Mike's
I'm good at that too.
Yeah, that's really not going to help your kids in that moment. They need to know.
So my talents don't work here?
Well, not always, no. Maybe down the road, and we'll talk about that. But they need to know that you understand, and that's what validation is all about. So think about how you can ask some questions, make them open-ended questions so that you can continue to draw the child out.
Yep.
So here's a really simple question that we like to use. That can almost always, you can use this in almost any
Just about every
situation.
situation,
And that's, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
I can see you're feeling sad today. Is that right?
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. Now, if you have a child that's really not verbalizing much, there's not much for you to listen to, but you're seeing the signs, good validating questions are the best way to kind of draw them out of that and provide that safe place for them to start to talk about it. So children need to be affirmed in their feelings. They need a parent who offers a safe space for sharing, who doesn't dismiss or disapprove of their emotions.
Yeah.
When children experience this, they feel comforted and they actually see their parent as their confidant who understands them. And this step alone can really help to relieve a lot of that struggle because they're starting to feel understood and that their feelings are okay.
Yeah, that's really good. So we are listening and we're aware. We're making sure that we get our mindset right. And then we're validating the child's feelings. We're not dismissing it, but we're really saying, hey, it's okay you feel that way.
And I'm here.
And once we start to really validate, then we can get into this process, this step 4 of helping that child verbally label their emotions.
Yeah.
We want to start digging a little bit deeper and really identifying the truth about what they're feeling. So, studies show that the act of labeling emotions, this is true for kids and adults, can have a really soothing effect on the nervous system. So helping kids to recover from all of this, it actually happens more quickly when they have an upsetting incident, when we help them label their emotion.
When they identify it.
Yeah, it's best, when kids can use very precise words to express their feelings. So sometimes you have to help them because they don't always know it right out of the gate. And so we want to help them really laser in on what they're actually feeling. If your son seems like they're feeling angry, or maybe they're feeling hurt or embarrassed. Maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe they're jealous or betrayed or frustrated. Like those are a lot of different feeling words. This doesn't mean that, we're going to tell their kids how they're supposed to feel. We're really digging into how they're actually feeling and helping them express it using their own vocabulary. They've got to develop an emotional vocabulary. And mixed emotions can be really confusing for kids. Yeah. Sometimes they're feeling 2 different things at the same time. There could be a kid, maybe he's getting ready to go on a camping trip with dad. That child could be feeling 2 different things. One, they could be really excited about the trip. They love camping. They can't wait for the adventure and all that. At the same time, we're talking about toxic exes here. Maybe dad is really complaining a lot about you. He's really negative about you anytime your name comes up or whatever. And that hurts your son. It hurts your child.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they're also feeling really apprehensive about this trip. That's really mixed. Like, I'm excited. I want to go camping with dad, but I know how dad acts sometimes. And so I'm feeling really apprehensive about it. This is really common. So when you hear kids expressing this kind of stuff or struggling with this, we want to work on helping them process those feelings and really label the emotions. It's okay. And making it okay to say, hey, it's okay that you're feeling both excited and maybe you're worried at the same time. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Again, we're entering into that. Now, there's a danger zone here, right? Because sometimes when kids are expressing those negative emotions and they're tied to that toxic ex, we've got the temptation to jump in and agree with them a little too much, right? Comments like, yeah, your dad really is a jerk, isn't he? That's just not helpful. It's not gonna do what you want it to do. I know it's tempting, but maybe it's better to say something like, hey, I can see why you feel that way, right? We're back to validation. I can
understand that.
Yeah. And then get right back into asking more questions about their feelings. Like, how did you feel when that happened? If they're talking about dad bad-mouthing you before, how did you feel when that happened? And stay focused on how they're feeling about it, not on how you're feeling about it.
Yeah.
Your goal is really to help them label those emotions while you're staying in the neutral zone.
Yeah.
We talked about the neutral zone last week.
Yeah. When you jump in with your opinions about their parent, you are no longer a safe person for the child.
Yeah.
Now the child is putting up a wall. Now there's a problem. Now they're experiencing anxiety because of what you're adding to the burden.
Right. Yeah. So
stay
in the neutral
focused
zone.
on their emotion.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
what's important here.
Yeah. All right. We're about to jump into step 5.
All
so
right.
step 1, we're listening and really observing noticing what's going on. Step 2, we're getting our mindset
It's
correct.
an opportunity.
Yep. Step 3, we're validating their feelings and what they're expressing to us. And number 4, we're digging a little deeper to help them label what their actual emotion is. So let's talk about, once we've done all that, now we're jumping to step 5.
Yeah. So step 5 is really moving forward to help the child problem solve. While setting some healthy limits around their behavior if that's necessary. Sometimes when kids are experiencing a really negative emotion like anger, they can start to act out, right? They're kicking the dog, they're punching walls, they're hurting themselves. And if this is the case, it's probably, you need to step in and set some good, healthy limits around inappropriate behavior. They can't be hurting themselves or hurting others or being destructive.
Yep.
Now, it's important for kids to know that their feelings are not the problem.
Right.
It's their misbehavior or their inappropriate behavior around the feeling. That's the problem that we're going to address.
Yeah, really being able to say, hey, I know that you're really upset right now and I understand why. However, we can't act this way.
Yeah, it's not okay to kick the dog.
Yeah, and I would be very explicit about making that differentiation between their feeling, which is okay, and their behavior that's not.
Right. They need to understand that they have a right to those feelings, validate the feelings, but they need to find a better way to express those feelings.
That's right.
And there's a lot of ways to explore how to help kids relieve and release anger and stuff like that.
And I would argue that we actually can't problem solve, which, we're talking about here with step 5, unless we've got some limits around the behavior.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
So that's kind of the part A of step 5 is making sure that behavior is okay.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes that's just not a problem and we jump right into problem solving.
Right.
Yeah.
So once you've determined that they're acting appropriately, they're not hurting anyone or hurting themselves, then you can help the child identify different ways to solve their own problem. Now, you're not jumping into fix-it mode here, and you're not distracting them with something here. This is about helping them explore a next step that they can take. So you're going to encourage the child to come up with their own ideas of how they can handle these things.
Absolutely. So how about we walk through one example that's going to take us all the way through the 5 steps so that we can see this in action. Can we do that?
Yeah, we can definitely go there. A common one that we hear about all the time on this topic of toxic ex that impacts the kids is that unreliable parent.
Yeah.
And that may be what this the question is about. So I experienced this with my daughter for sure. I remember one time Annika came to me and she just kind of blurted out, Daddy makes lots of promises, but then he doesn't keep them.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And that was an open door.
Yeah,
There's my opportunity to come alongside her, to go into the
It's
pain.
like a big flashing light.
Yeah,
Emotion coaching,
yeah.
emotion coaching.
Yeah, as much as sometimes we're tempted to just kind of brush it off, that was an open door. So I was aware. That was step one. And then I quickly had to make sure that my mindset was right. So this was an opportunity to enter into her pain and build some intimacy with her. So no matter how busy I was, I wanted to stop and take the time to help her process.
Yeah.
Next, I had to validate her. So I commented and I asked this question. That sounds really hard. I'm sorry, honey. Can you tell me more about how that makes you feel?
That's really good. So that actually, in one phrase, in one sentence, you completed step 3 and step 4.
Yeah.
You validated her, step 3, by saying that sounds really hard. And then in step 4, you quickly moved into helping her name that emotion she was feeling by saying, can you tell me more about how that makes you feel?
Yeah, I kept her talking.
I love that because it shows, in this process, it's not super complicated.
No, it's not as hard as we think it is.
Yeah. Okay. So you asked her, hey, that sounds really hard. I'm sorry. Can you tell me how that makes you feel? Right. And then what?
Well, I needed to spend a little time making sure that we were able to get to that right feeling word. I didn't want to just gloss over it. And when we started discovering things, and by the way, I did use an emotion chart with Annika. I had a big chart on the wall that had all kinds of emotions. You can find them online. And so she was actually able to look and say, oh, that's what I'm feeling. And that can be a helpful tool. But we discovered that the bottom line feeling for her was disappointment. It was a deep disappointment. And she was realizing that she couldn't rely on her dad's words, that his actions were actually different than his words.
Yeah.
So that was hard. That was really hard for her. It was hard for me too, but I stayed focused on her feelings. It wasn't about me. So then I spent some time focusing on how she could take some steps forward. After we identified the feeling, we got down to it. Now, what can we do next?
And that's step 5, right?
Right. This is now the problem solving step. Now, we recommend that you start by asking questions, different questions than we did in step 4 when you're labeling the emotions. These are questions about action. So things like, what do you think you could do about that? That might be a really great place to start. Now, if the child can't come up with anything, then you might make some suggestions. But the key here is to ask permission first. You don't want to just jump in and say, well, I think you should do this.
That's right.
You want to be tentative here. Is it okay if I share an idea with you, honey? Ask for permission to step in. Now,
there's some real brain science around that, what
is.
that does, and opens up our brain to receiving what we're about. Once our brain feels like we've given someone else permission, it opens up a new neural pathway. So definitely this is huge. Asking permission, simply, hey, can I share an idea? Most of the time kids are going to go, oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, the goal is to have the child own the solution. Right.
You don't want to apply a solution to them that they really aren't on board with. You want them to come up with their own solution. So you're just offering some ideas here.
Yeah, that's good.
Maybe this could work. I don't know if this feels right to you, but it's just an idea.
That's good.
So with Annika, I started out by asking, do you think your dad knows about how this makes you feel? And in this case, she didn't know. She was kind of like, well, sometimes kids just think parents should know things. And so she wasn't quite sure. So then I moved on and I said, how could you share what you're feeling with your dad?
Yeah.
And then after that, we just explored some ways that she could communicate with her dad that,
That
would
was
be
healthy.
helpful. Yeah,
that's good. I want to point out one more thing here. It's kind of a detail and it's a little bit of a nuance, but it's really, really important. And that's the difference between an open-ended question and a closed-ended question. Notice what Kim said there. She asked the question of, how could you share what you're feeling with your dad? That's much different than, do you think you could share what you're feeling with your dad?
Yeah.
Right. That's really easy. Oh no, I couldn't do that.
Yeah, that's a yes or no.
But just by simply tweaking that to how could you, anytime you start a sentence with a how or a what, you're probably headed more toward an open-ended question. And that's really good. So that now the child can explore different options.
Yeah, it
like
engages,
there's lots of different ways.
Engages the brain.
So again, it's a nuance. It's a little bit of a detail, but it's so important. So in this process, really stay focused on those open-ended questions.
Yeah. And after that, we explored some ways that she could communicate with her dad.
Yeah.
And we talked about it. But here's the thing about step 5, finding that solution. There is no easy answer here. This is really, really messy.
It is messy.
I wish we had just the easy quick fix for every solution, for every situation. We don't. And it could be that it wouldn't be reasonable for the child to try to talk or communicate or even confront that toxic ex.
True.
That may not be a good route to take.
Yep.
But maybe they just need their feelings validated by you in that moment.
Yeah.
Maybe that's enough just to be understood and to be heard. Or maybe they'll decide that they want to go talk to the school counselor and talk about it even on a deeper level. And that's great. You can support them in that. Sometimes a third party can help. Or maybe they need to figure out how to readjust their own expectations about that other parent.
Yeah. How can we just accept that parent for where they are right now? Yeah.
That's a hard place to be because you want your child to continue to care and love that other parent while they're managing their disappointment or sadness or whatever emotion they're having toward the situation with that parent. And it's messy.
Sure.
So all of these things can be really delicate. And remember that you're sticking to the neutral zone.
That's right.
That's where you're camping out.
If you keep wondering, well, okay, exactly what's the neutral zone? Go listen to episode number 6, and we'll link to that in the show notes.
Yeah. You're staying focused on helping the child process their own emotions and solutions. You're not jumping into fix-it mode, and you're not offering your own opinions about that other parent.
Right.
Yeah. And remember, these toxic ex issues, they're likely not going to be solved, right? We already talked about how you can't fix them. You can't control them. Sometimes it's really more about helping the child to live well in the tension. These are things that probably aren't going to go away, but by emotionally supporting them, we can help to ease that tension.
And help them build resiliency.
Yeah. And they're not going to be solved in one conversation, especially if this toxic ex has, predictable behaviors that are hurting the child over and over. It may be a conversation after every visitation where you need to go through this whole process.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Yep.
You're showing up. And also remember that even if there isn't a tangible solution, you're just helping. You're still making a difference. It's okay. And you're helping that child to self-regulate when things don't go their way in life. And that's a skill we all need.
Yeah, you're helping them build that skill.
Yep, you're helping them move into adulthood more equipped for other people that are going to be toxic in their life, which we all know it's going to be there. So you're actually building a skill.
And, the reality is that emotion coaching in general, like following these 5 steps can have a real buffering effect for kids as they navigate through all kinds of disruption in the family, divorce, remarriage, all that kind of stuff. And as they're going back and forth and navigating these challenging family dynamics. That's right. Now, according to Dr. John Gottman, when parents are present for their kids emotionally, helping them to cope with negative feelings and guiding them through periods of family stress, the kids are shielded from many of the damaging effects of divorce.
Yeah, that's
Did you hear that?
amazing.
They're shielded from it. This helps them to really learn how to process it.
Yeah.
Now, we talked about inadequacy earlier, and I know we feel that a lot of times. I have felt that so many times with our kids. I know Kim has felt that as well. But here's something you really need to hear. Kids don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be present. Yeah. You need to let that sink in. They don't need you to be perfect, but they need you to be present. And these 5 steps that we just talked about, anybody can do.
Yeah.
I know that you have what it takes to do this.
Yeah.
So don't sell yourself short. Enter into these conversations.
All you need to do is show up.
Yeah. And if you got to go back through and listen to these again, we'll lay out the 5 steps in the full show notes. but go back and listen again and lay it out for yourself and say,
the book
okay,
is fantastic.
Absolutely. So what we've tried to do in this episode is focus on those situations where that toxic ex is kind of causing sadness or hurt feelings and those types of things with a child. But like we said earlier, sometimes kids get defiant or rebellious. They're acting out in ways that could be creating chaos because the pain that they're experiencing as a result of what is happening with that other parent. Yeah. And so that's where we're going to be focusing on next week in the next episode. Like, what can we do to curb some of that chaos and move forward? And it's a little bit of a different approach than what we're talking about in this one. So want to make sure that you tune in next week and catch that. And you might have one of each of these kids in one home. Sometimes we've got kids who are really acting out and another one who's really withdrawing and silent. And you need both of these strategies to help you move forward. So again, make sure you tune in next week. We are excited to be able to have you joining us on this journey. And take a minute to click subscribe. And please, would you take just a moment to give us your feedback? Yeah. We would love an honest rating and review in iTunes or Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you're listening. We read every single one of them. We want to hear from you. And that just helps us to serve you better. So for episode number 7, that's a wrap.
Talk to you later.